to the front of the net. Puck work to the outside to Eklund. Howe back to Eklund again. Kerr sparring with Stevens in front. Eklund creeps behind. Out in front to Kerr. He scores! Tim Kerr and the Flyers are perfect on 5-on-3s. They are 3 for 3. Get their first power play goal of the night and tie the game.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. Hey, everybody, it's Isaiah. Just reminding you about Jim's South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia, PA. They're back. That's right. After the fire, they've returned. And now you have, in the 40-year tradition of Philly cheesesteaks, Jim's South Street down on 400 South Street in Philly. If you're down there, check it out. The finest cheesesteaks, hoagies, and fries in the grandest Philadelphia tradition. You know you want one. And if you're down there, if you live down there, of course, you can use Grubhub or DoorDash, whatever it takes. Jim South Street, 400 South Street in Philadelphia. They're back. Get one soon. And we are back. It is Isaiah. Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 245. The Flyers are just about at midseason. We're going to treat it that way, 40 games through. We're brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com. And we got a lot to get into evaluating this team. We got a situation between the pipes that could blow up in the Flyers' faces. It was only about 6 years ago and change that Ron Hextall went into the season with an injured Brian Elliott and Michael Neuvirth, counting on those guys. And I think it was 6 other goalies later or something like that. He was no longer the GM, and we started on the Fletcher train, and that ran into a wall. But okay, enough about that. Let's bring in the panel before we get to our guest. Always to my left, Chef B. What's your opening thought for tonight, friend?
New year, same old Flyers. And we'll see, I'm sure we'll get into it, but it's kind of ironic that it's going to be a new year, but it's going to be the same old. But we'll talk about it. It's great to be talking Flyers again. First show of the new year. Glad to be back.
You got it. And of course, the great Dan Stover joins us as well, fighting the even more snow than they have in the Delaware Valley, apparently.
Yeah, Philly used to, and I lived in Philly most of my life, used to get a lot of the snow, and DC wouldn't get as much. Now, this storm, DC, we got like 8 or 9 inches. It's still snowing out there. So I throw on my Lindros jersey, go out. I don't even use a shovel. I'm like a Canadian boy. I just use my hockey stick, and I get the snow up. So it's pretty effective. And that's what I've been doing all day. Yeah.
The hockey, you're going with that? The hockey stick?
Yeah. Real hockey players don't use shovels. I mean, come on.
Okay. I got you.
Yeah.
So, let's bring in from You Would Think podcast and 97.3 ESPN in South Jersey. Joining us tonight, bringing back Kevin Durso. Kevin, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me again, guys. Great to be with you for the first one of 2025.
Yeah, Kevin, it's going to be what might be one of the most consequential years in recent Flyers memory, and certainly for Danny Briere and Keith Jones, you would think that would be the case, having launched this rebuild and acquired and accumulated all the assets from last year, and even passing on the first-round draft pick and pushing it over to this year. So, I mean, just before I get into what the mess between the pipes, what's your I don't know if expectations really the word, but what's your feeling going into this like trade deadline era? And then we've got the summer. Seems like it's really a very, very important period of time from like now through like, say, the end of July.
Sure. It absolutely is to me because in addition to all the draft picks you're referencing, to me, this year in particular, once it was official that Matvei Michkov was coming over and that timeline was starting now, not 2 years from now, it kind of became go time on this whole process. Like now you've got to really have, to me, 2 impactful off seasons before you get to the point where you're in a contract year for him. And that's where all this, to me, it's where all the work needs to be done. So if you didn't do a whole lot of it last off season and there wasn't a whole lot of activity and that was the big move, this offseason and next are the 2 most important. So what happens over the next 6 months is certainly of great importance to the rebuild.
Yeah, absolutely. Now last year at this time, the Flyers were 2013 or 2014 and 6 for 46 points. They had a +7 goal differential. They were 23rd in goals for. They were 8th in goals against, a very key stat for them at the time. The power play was 10.2, dead last in the NHL, and the PK was 86%, really excellent. This year, the Flyers are about 8 points behind their pace after 40 games. They have they're 17, 18, and 5. They have 39 points. Their goal differential is a -21, I believe. Actually put these together before last night. But their power play percentage is still way down there in 28th in the league, but it's 5 percentage points higher. Penalty kill is 78%, which is 20th in the league, and that's been falling down. So some of that is reflective with the lack of moves that they made in the offseason besides Michkov. But a lot of it, of course, has to do with what's going on between the pipes. As Sam Urson has incurred yet another injury, his 3rd lower body injury in a short period of time. We know that Ivan Fedotov fell out of favor until last night. We got probably a better than expected performance. And in my opinion, Alexei Kolosov is not really an NHL goaltender yet. What do you make of their goaltending and what it portends for the rest of this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with it. It's the injury, kind of the injuries that keep resurfacing for Ersson are a huge problem because you need a guy to stay healthy. He's been a stabilizer for them, honestly, when he's on. And I think the timing of this injury is another thing with this because he had 2 really good games to that point. He had played well in Anaheim. He was pitching a shutout against San Jose. You're thinking he's back to form. He kind of got over these handful of starts he had in December that weren't very good. And then now he's hurt again. And that kind of shuffles your whole situation around. I'm with you on the Kolosov thing. Is he ready for this? Probably not. Is he thrown into this because of all the other surrounding circumstances? Probably, and Ersson's one part of that, but also everything with the offseason, even getting him to participate in training camp, that all, to me, that all factors in. It's part of the reason why. I look at Fedotov specifically in that game Sunday night, and yeah, does he probably want the second one back? Sure, but yeah. I would have expected probably something closer to what Kolosov gave you in Vegas, where it was actually, what did he want back after that game? 2 or 3 at least, So I'm surprised that you even got the performance you did from Fedotov. I think he's earned another one on Tuesday. In my opinion, I would give him another chance. And when it really comes down to it, I think you really have to seriously evaluate whether or not depending on the timeline of Ersson, which right now is day to day, but obviously that's a very fluid situation. We heard that before and it turned into a month. So we'll see. But to me, whenever he does come back, I think you have to seriously evaluate what you think the depth chart order is and whether or not you do consider sending Kolosov down. I think it's something that's got to be considered. And to be honest, if he can't handle that, and that's the reason why you're kind of holding off in the first place, then that's the bigger issue than whether or not he performs well or whatever. But I think it has to be explored. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. And for now, it's going to be put on the table until you know more about Ersson. But whenever he does come back, I think it's a conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah, you got it. Let's bring the panel in. Chef, what's on your mind?
I would say this, even after the couple of sample games that you saw from Fedotov, and then now what we've seen this last several games from Kolosov, I should say. Even with that little bit, it still seems like that Fedotov is like way ahead of where Kolosov. I mean, I thought he would be better. I thought he would evolve, but he seems to be always unprepared for a game. And I don't know if it's a mental thing. I mean, obviously you see some of the saves he made in several games that the talent is there. It's just, there's something, I don't know if it's preparation or if it's a mental thing. It's just Fedotov, although he may not be as athletic or whatever, and he just seemed like he was more NHL ready than what I've seen out of Kolosov, even in one game. You know, it seemed like he was, that one game sample we got from Fedotov seemed like he was a lot better prepared than any game I've seen from Kolosov. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody else, but or whatever. I'll leave it to you guys to answer that. But I'm not comfortable with Kolosov. After I saw Fedotov made a couple saves, I was pretty confident with him in the game last night. So I just don't know where to go from here. I mean, it's obvious that he has to go down to the AHL. He needs like a whole freaking year in the AHL, I think, to get used to this, because, and I just don't know where you go from here if you don't do that.
Well, Dan, I mean, for me, I think what Chef is kind of throwing up in the air is some talent, some concepts like talent, which Kolosov has more talent, versus maturity and development as well.
Yeah, which is not unexpected, right? Because Fedotov is 28 years old. He's won a KHL championship. I mean, he's more professional. He's more polished just when you see him out there. And it's pretty easy to tell that Kolosov is very raw, right? He's very raw. I mean, again, I don't know exactly what the whole circumstances were about him, not wanting to be here unless he was going to be in the NHL. And you hear a lot of stuff like that. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of reliable sources that kind of talked about how if Kolosov isn't in the NHL, he'd rather just go back to Russia. It's complicated by the fact that the Flyers hold his NHL contract rights in perpetuity. Right. But it's an interesting conversation, and it's kind of fascinating because, this team is in a rebuild. So it's not like we theoretically need to be winning all these games. It should be more about developing these goaltenders. Mm-hmm. And when I watch these three goalies play, I do think that Kolosov has the most upside of all three of these goalies. That is just me watching them, and I look at how athletic Kolosov is. He just needs a lot of work, right? His positioning is bad. I just think there's so much room for him to level up that he's the guy of those three that kind of gets me the most excited about what he can be in the future. But then there's these issues of his maturity level, and he probably should be in the AHL right now. Assuming that they can coach him well down there, he probably should be in the AHL. But we need to think about this through the lens of like, all right, who's in the organization and who's going to be our goalie years down the road. Now, Yegor Zavragin is probably one of the best goalie prospects in the world. He's over in Russia. He's not going to be over here for 3 years. So it's like, all right, what do we do until then? I mean, I don't know if you guys think that we should be trying to find a veteran goalie to bring in or some other kind of solution, or if you want to send Kolosov down, but he basically is like, no, I want to go back to Russia instead of being sent down. then what do you do? I mean, there's a lot of questions that are very hard to answer, I feel like, for these guys in this situation right now. I mean, I wonder if keeping all three of them on the roster, like they have done for a certain period of the year, and maybe, until Urson comes back, you still play Kolosov a little bit, see how Fedotov plays. I mean, Fedotov played pretty well against the Maple Leafs. And then when Urson comes back, if Kolosov really doesn't want to go down, maybe you keep all three up and you really work with Kolosov, outside of games. I don't know. It's a difficult scenario to try and solve for because of where the Flyers are in the rebuild and the fact that Kolosov does clearly have a lot of talent. I mean, that's why they put up with the BS that was going on with him, right? Like, clearly. And, Kevin Kurtz from The Athletic wrote an article that was pretty critical of Kolosov. I think it called him the worst goalie in the league right now. Mm-hmm. He did mention in the article that, there's room for improvement, right? But I think that I could read through the lines and see that Kevin was really upset more about the situation and that the Flyers are letting a 23-year-old goalie kind of walk all over them, right? There's a lot of different things at play here, but it's tricky. Goalies are tricky. It's tricky. I mean, do you want to trade Kolosov and then he becomes an ex-Bobrovsky? Like, it's a tough situation. I don't know. There's a lot of variables.
Quick question. Does anybody know, like, say you draw the line in the sand if you're Flyers management, and he goes, well, I'm out of here and I'm heading back to the KHL, and he heads back to the KHL. What are you going to do? Lock him at the airport? But here's what consequences does that have with the league? I mean, can they waive his contract, or how does that work? Is there any financial compensation, or is there punishment too? So, I mean,
well, the Flyers would have to loan him back to the KHL. I mean, he has a contract with the Flyers right now.
Yeah.
And while he has that contract with the Flyers, he can be loaned by the Flyers back to the KHL, right? So the Flyers could loan him back to the KHL. And ultimately, if Kolosov wants to play in the NHL, the Flyers are the ones in the driver's seat, because Kolosov can't – the Flyers have his rights in perpetuity. I think until he would become like a unrestricted free agent after a contract that he's already, in with the Flyers. Like right now, Kolosov's contract, I think, is through the end of next season, and he would still be a restricted free agent, which means that the Flyers basically, even after next season, would still be in the driver's seat.
Yeah, Kev, I mean, that's the thing that's so tough about this is that the Flyers are last in the league in save percentage at 869. Mm-hmm. They have given up going into last night's game, like goals saved above expectation between all three of them was minus 19. So that has the potential to be like minus 40 by the end of the year, because we're just about halfway through the season. So here, that's the dilemma for me. I could see the concerns, particularly viewed through the lens of Gauthier, what happened a year ago, and also Bobrovsky, that the Flyers are hesitant to walk away. But the performance, they really have more or less the worst goaltending in the league.
Yeah, I mean, the big difference with Kolosov and the Bobrovsky thing that people kind of keep going back to is that when Bobrovsky was on the team in the first place, that was still playoff era years. They were making the playoffs with a really talented roster, and they felt like it was go time to go make an acquisition of a free agent goalie, and to bring somebody in that they could sign long term. That's where Brizgalov came in. There's no Ilya Brizgalov walking through the door next year to take a spot. This should be open season at this position. So if Kolosov is worried about whether or not the net is disappearing essentially over the next handful of years, it's not. You have every opportunity to earn it with your own level of play. I think, and I think Kolosov, the athleticism is a great quality to have. I think it's sometimes it's a hard thing to find in a goalie who's that athletic and can make the kind of saves he's making that are incredible saves. But you're not judged on quality of saves near as much if you're letting in fundamental saves on a regular basis. And he is. That's the problem. You cannot have a goaltender, any team can't, where every night you go out and you're giving up 1 to 2 stoppable shots every single night. It just doesn't work that way. And that's where that number is coming from, is we can talk about Kolosov's athleticism all day and how great it is to have that and how he can only continue to grow into that. Maybe it does turn into something on a similar level to Bobrovsky down the road. But until you can make the fundamental saves, and that is 1,000% predicated on your positioning and how you set yourself up, your mentality in net, it's all of it. You look at the perfect example, and I know that when they went back and looked at it, the second goal in the Vegas game, it's a wraparound. They said it went off of Nick Seeler. I get it did. Look at where his feet are, though.
Right.
He's outside the post. He has no leverage to push off. He's late reacting to it. There was no other play. He was going on for the wraparound. It was clear he was going for the wraparound. And you don't get over there. So that is 1,000% on your positioning. And when that happens, it's definitely a teaching moment. And you have the ability to teach him how to do these things. And you do have to remember his age and that he just turned 23. And that's, so you don't want to pull the plug on something too early long term. But I really do think that part of the picture here is this whole position to me is a long play. I think the two guys that are the two 19-year-olds that you have waiting in the wings are the two guys that are really the long play with this. To me, Fedotov's not a long-term answer. He's probably gone after the contract is up after next season. Sam Harrison is up in the air because I think they really like what he's able to give with some form of consistency when he's on his game, but the injury trouble is not going to keep you around long-term. And then Kolosov, I think they really do like the raw talent that's there, but you've got a long road ahead of you. And absolutely, he should probably be molding in the AHL more than anything else. But you really are. And this is where, to the point about the Kevin Kerr's article that we're talking about, you shouldn't be letting a guy hold. Essentially, I called it holding them hostage. Don't let a 23-year-old hold you hostage at a position when development is 1,000% the biggest key to this whole thing. You shouldn't be giving into what a 23-year-old wants just because that's, trying to keep him around for longer or to try to please him at this given moment. If he's, especially on a team coached by John Tortorella, if he's not good enough and he needs the work, to me, you need to have an honest conversation.
Yeah. The thing about this that's so perplexing is that this is a team in a rebuild, but it's not your typical rebuild where this doesn't matter. They could just go trade for Joe Schmo, and it's just, they need a body in there. The passing time, the waiting, they're on track to get like the 5th overall pick at the worst, right? It's that they're not doing that here. A lot of people are kind of secretly hoping, that's probably would be the best thing. But if I can't think that way, if they're not going to think that way, they're kind of putting pieces together of a team based on being able to hit the ground running and avoid the treadmill of Buffalo and Ottawa and what used to be Arizona, where the whole cultural thing. Well, if you got half a season left and you can't stop a shot, you have the worst goaltending in the league, more or less, that starts eroding that particular aspect of what you've been trying to build up for going on 3 years. That's the problem. Dan?
Yeah, this is not necessarily related. This is a thought I've been having a lot the last few weeks, and it's not an optimistic thought. But I keep coming back to the fact that with the way that the Flyers, they're in the maximum pain zone most years for fans, where they're basically not good enough to make the playoffs and they're too good to get a top 10 pick. The 2 times that we've been in the top 5 recently and walked away with Nolan Patrick right before Miro Heiskanen and Cale Makar were taken, and then Cutter Gauthier, who we basically, turned into Jamie Drysdale, who, the jury's out. But I just can't help but think that, blowing those 2 top 5 picks is not necessarily something that an organization, especially one like this that doesn't get a lot of picks, can recover from. I understand that getting Mishkov at 8, 7 or 8, whatever it was, obviously offsets that a little bit. But, we spend how much time on this show talking about how is this organization going to get a franchise center or a really good center? And we've just missed so many opportunities to either be bad enough to have a chance to get someone like that or to draft someone. I mean, look, well, I guess did Shane Wright go right before Cutter Gauthier? I guess he did, right?
Yeah.
Seattle took him right before, and he's not. He looks decent at this point. But And their point is well taken, Isaiah, about Buffalo and how many high picks they've had, and they're still a disaster. And the Red Wings have had a lot of high picks, and they're kind of still a disaster. There's no right way to go through a rebuild, right? But I just keep coming back to the huge faux pas with Nolan Patrick and Cutter Gauthier, and wondering if that's something that, when there's such a narrow margin for building a cup contender in this league, if those two specific mistakes are things that you just can't overcome.
I mean, where would they be if they drafted Aho instead of Travis Konechny? They'd be that much further along just because they filled the center position. Just to me, when they passed on, what's his name, the winger for the Wild, instead of taking York, had they just drafted Boldy?
Well, he's
going to be a better player.
Yeah.
And they need a power forward. That guy's going to be a prototypical 30 goal in front of the net, play the whole two-way forward.
No, and I like Jeff
I could do that.
And you watch Zev Buyam, dominate the World Juniors, and you're just like, I don't know. Did they really think that after the Cutter Gauthier thing, the same agent, that maybe Buyam didn't want to play here? I mean, I don't know. I like Lutsenko, but he looks like a second or third line center. Zev Buyam just looks like a really, really good defenseman.
He looks like he'll help our power play, or anybody's power play for that matter. But I mean,
we don't want a heck of a lot better than Oliver Bonk. I would say that.
Oh boy, yeah. I mean, you don't want to react to the WJC, because I think the Canada's situation, and Kevin, you can weigh in on this as you see fit. I think Canada just had the wrong idea from the very outset about what they wanted to do, and it seems very, very dysfunctional there. So I'm trying not to judge harshly the Flyers that played or didn't even get a chance to play, like Bjarnason. Although I don't think Canada's goaltending was the issue. I'm trying not to get too emotional or overreact to that situation.
Well, I wasn't real. Kevin can jump in, but I'm not talking about those specifically, like just what happened in the World Juniors. I mean, I think I'm talking about the body of work. I mean, Zev Buyam is a much better defenseman than Oliver Bonk, I think. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really because I didn't focus a ton on World Juniors this year in particular. I know that the Team Canada roster makeup was a real big point of contention. The number of players that were taken in the top 10 of last year's draft that didn't get even so much as practically an invite to camp was pretty substantial, honestly. Yeah, I mean, they've got a lot to figure out. And the thing about this isn't, and I'll bring up something that I said on YWT yesterday when we did our last show, because one of the things that I think is very hard to kind of piece together and makes it hard to evaluate where you are in a rebuild process or anything like that is, and I'll just be blunt saying it because I was on the show yesterday when I did this, half the teams in the NHL suck. Like, it just is what it is. You've got, I couldn't believe, or there's an element to me where I can't believe I watched the Flyers play the December that they did, the record they had against teams that I actually thought going into December that they had a shot of beating, several of them. You know, maybe not the Minnesota game or playing Florida or playing LA twice, but everybody else I kind of figured it's pretty close to a level playing field with the way the Flyers finished November. And then you see what happens after that. And I look at the standings and I see they're 2 points out of a playoff spot, but also 2 points away from being last in the division. Right. That kind of, complexity to the standings with so much mediocrity, it clouds your judgment a little bit, I think, because it makes you think you're closer than you are, and you may not be at the same time. I give them full marks for the way that the game went on Sunday. The fact that you put a goalie in who hasn't played in a month and he gives you a shot, that was impressive. I thought there were also extenuating circumstances to that Toronto game as well, though. Toronto had played on Saturday. The Flyers had not. Toronto loses a defenseman after the first period. They're playing with 5D. They still won the game, though. And that's why they're ranked 6th in the league in standings, and things like that. And I just think it makes it really hard to evaluate your position, or it can at least cloud your judgment on making decisions about where you need to go in the future, what's really better for your team and the building process. Because I've been for about 2 weeks or so, I've really also been, and I said this on one of our episodes of YWT about the same thing, the Buffalo situation, where 2 first overall picks, 2 second overall picks, and 4 8th overall picks over the course of the last 13 years, and it doesn't do anything for you. There really is no clear-cut blueprint on how to rebuild a team at this point. And similarly, as you go through, we're at the halfway point of the season. The Flyers have all these problems that we can dive into between the goaltending, defensive coverages have been bad, penalty kill hasn't been great, power play is still a struggle. Sometimes it's a finishing problem. It's a scoring problem. There are games where they score a ton, they don't make a save, all that type of stuff. We can go into every problem that you can come up with, and you look at the standings after a certain point and go, the New York Rangers haven't figured out their problems. The New York Islanders haven't figured out their problems. All these teams that are hovering around the same spot, they haven't figured it out either. So the Flyers actually have a shot at making the playoffs. Do I believe they will? No. But do they have a shot because of what the standings tell you? Sure, I guess they do, because no one's jumped in again. It's very much like last year where I kind of kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Okay, the Flyers are there, but at some point, someone's going to turn it around and get back into the picture. And for a long time, nobody did. And that was what really kind of was eye-opening to me, and has been throughout the course of this year too, where I just look, and so many teams don't qualify in that elite tier. It's a very exclusive group.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's Gary Bettman's parody, spelled Parody, because that's what we're looking at. That gets into discussions about the salary cap and all that kind of stuff. And I guess it also is kind of from the pandemic and not having the reins so tight on the salary, and that's loosening up. But what do you do as a fan in the interim, unless you're making perfect moves, perfect trades that work out? You're really stuck. And the Flyers, a premier franchise in a major market that was considered, not one of the original six, but the extra seventh for years, that they were legitimized that quickly as a franchise in this league. That's all down the toilet. And it's really frustrating for fans as we're trying to evaluate things. We're trying to have a mature, measured approach. But after a while, this is sports. This is supposed to be fun. I'm tired of talking about salaries and things like that. I know it's the real world, but I want to be able to go and get players. We have a lot of market advantages. The travel here on the East Coast is one of the best, or the second best in the entire league. And it's a good market. It's just very frustrating to work through this. And it brings me, I guess, to the next topic. It's like, okay, so if the Flyers are in really year 3 of this rebuild, there is a sense among pundits and also the fans, they have to show some improvement next year. I mean, we've done this rebuild thing at one level. It has to get to another level next year, because it's hard to go play for a guy, Martinet, like Tortorella, and expect these guys to block the shots and do all the things and deal with all the drama and that comes with this particular coach and how they want to do things, without having a corresponding move by the front office to say, okay, we've improved in this position, this line, that line. I mean, the Cates line has been carrying this team for like 5 or 6 weeks, and that's very admirable. It's really helped Tyson Forster. We're seeing some of the benefits of the improvement in strength and in checking ability of Bob Brink, but it's really doesn't speak well to where you're going in 2-3 years.
Oh, I will say this, Jason Martinez talked about it on one of his shows, what your expectations were for this season, and whether or not you started thinking that they were going to be better based off of last year because they just conked out. But, whatever it was, your expectations, they are allowed to change during the course of a season. Mine have been pretty much flat. I pretty much said the same thing, and I'm not surprised at where they are. I thought that this was going to be the way it was. We're going to be right where we're at right now. I expect them even to make a little run where they're in the mix. I said that would be up in the mix until pretty much towards the end. They'll make a run for it again. All you need is Fedotov or Urson or one of the goalies just to be better than adequate, And judging by the other teams that you mentioned in the league, that's why I said at the beginning of the season that they were still in the mix because of the turmoil. They didn't necessarily, did I think they'd get better? No. Did they get worse? No, they're right where they are last year. The problem is there are teams around them that have gotten better at leapfrog them, but also at the same time, there are teams now that are quote unquote, messing the bed, let's just say. they're not going anywhere. You know, there are several teams that are in just as much turmoil as the Flyers are. So you're right at that spot. Now, you're right. They need to make a move. The move is this off season here. I think, you know, you have a lot of draft capital. We talked about that so many times. There's 6 picks that you can play with. If you really, now you need to make those moves to get those people. If you have to send a Farabee or some one of these guys away with the promise of hopefully getting something back that you can use as more draft capital, because I don't think, you know, you're going to solve this by free agency. Not this year anyway. Following year, yes, because you got to make moves to show that you're investing in a team. So far, you know what you said about being number 17. They were a great franchise to play for over the years, based on their, you know, what you had said, all the location and all that benefits, and Ed Snyder being the best owner in professional sports, or whatever you want to say. But the point being now is that glimmer, that shine is gone off this team. So I don't know if they need to get that back. And I think players and free agents here are very hastened to go, well, they haven't made any moves to make it look like that they're all in. And I think that's half that's what, you know, Jonesy said, they're sellers again at the deadline. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the mindset is right then and there. So I think if they do that and they get rid of a couple of pieces, they got to make room. They got to make room for money. They got to make room for players too. And I think that's the major move, is going to be it right in the offseason here, right before the draft.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things, I mean, they were definitely down from last year. I mean, the goal differential is like minus 28 from last year. It's you know, they're nowhere near as good. And the main culprit there is the goaltending with that. So I think that's why people are kind of struggling. It's tough, and you can lose patience during a rebuild. But I think the expectations are now, with the way this is going, and the goaltending looks like it's really going to be a problem the rest of the year. Is it enough, Kevin, for them to consider by the trade deadline of maybe trying to get a vet in here to try and stabilize things? You know, off with Kolosov and to the AHL or bust, and then give Fedotov a chance. And then the X factor is Ursan and his health. You know, do we want to push him this year? And what's the nature of the injury? And some of these things are not knowable right now.
Yeah, are you talking a veteran goalie or just a veteran in general?
No, a goaltender.
Right. I don't see them doing that. I just don't expect it, because I think that they want to have those guys getting, and I think Kolosov should be getting the playing time in the AHL. That part I agree with. I think they're going to try to continue to give Fedotov a chance. What it really comes down to, because last year the big problem was that they couldn't trust anybody who would have played in that backup role. They tried essentially at the end of the year, they tried 3 different guys and none of them worked. You know, Cal Peterson would get a start, give up 7 goals. Nope, we're going to try something. Now we're going to try Felix Sandstrom again. Felix Sandstrom gave up I think it was 3 on 14 shots against Florida and an empty netter in there, and they lose a game 4-1. So now all of a sudden Fedotov's back in play. Let's get him over here. You quite literally in the worst case scenario situation, throw him in cold in the middle of a game. What was it? 4 or 5 days after he had come over in the first place.
It's crazy.
And I get where it was coming from at that point in time, because you had come so far. I mean, we're talking that, I know that, remember, that game was April 1st. So you've come so far in the season that in John Tortorella's mind, I'm going to push every button I can to try to win to get into the playoffs, because there's 7 games left. I'm trying. I'm pushing every button I can to make this happen, because after 75 games, I want to make the playoffs, and I don't blame them for that. You're at an interesting spot here where, honestly, you know, I don't like the trial by fire thing with the 2 essentially rookie goalies, but I don't see any other real solution here, because if you wanted to change the solution, call up Cal Peterson then when Ersson's hurt, and send Kolosov down and let him work and get all the starts at the AHL. I'm not saying Cal Peterson's going to make them any better. It's not going to do anything, but it's at least a guy you bring in and you try something else. And I don't think it's going to work, but that's who you can, you know, delegate starts to for the time being until you come up with a different solution somewhere down the line, potentially. And I don't even think that that's where the focus is for a move anyway. Like I said, I think they really are long playing that position, knowing what they've got in the 2 19-year-olds, or what the hope is anyway. I mean, every time I see another highlight of Zavragin, it's like, to me, I look at him and he's your Shesterkin. That's what I see when I see him right now. He's playing so well in the KHL that I sit there and I say, let him cook over there for 5 more years. And when he's 24, which is the age that Shesterkin was when he came in to the NHL, that's your time, to me. That's what just feels right now. Whatever you do in between, whether it's Ersson or somebody else, or maybe Bjarnason's part of that picture earlier, I don't know where it goes, because it's always a position that's the long play. I think about all of the goalies, and it's funny because it's going to go back to the year that you started the show with, the Brian Elliott, Michael Neuvert year. The 8 goalies were involved. Among the list of goalies, I can go down the list of guys who have better save percentages than any Flyers goalie in the league, right? That are in, any Flyers goalie right now. And I'll find Cam Talbot, who was part of one of those groups. And I'll find Cal Pickard, who was part of those groups. And I'll find Alex Lyon and Anthony Stolarz. Stolarz is having a brilliant year. How long ago was it that Stolarz was drafted? Like, it's a long play position, and you're kind of trying to speed up the process in a unique way, because you have 2 guys with very unique situations. Kolosov with his whole circumstances of why he's even here, and Fedotov having basically lost an entire year of play with his situation. So it's unique situation. It really is par for the course with the Flyers goaltending situation, but it is a long play position, and I don't see them trying to at least not trying to do something for a quarter to half of a season to solve this.
Gotcha. Dan?
So one of the things I've also been thinking about is, we're in a rebuild. What have we learned this season? Like, if you're in a rebuild, you're supposed to have learned things, right? Well, okay, what have we learned? I think we've learned that we probably don't have a 1C or maybe even a future 2C on the current roster. We've learned that. We have not learned, other than the fact that Matvei Michkov is going to help the power play, which we knew. We have not learned how we're going to improve the power play from being one of the worst in the league. We have not learned which one of our defensemen has the potential to become a number 1 power play D-man, except maybe Emil Andre, who they sent down for some unknown reason. So we haven't learned much about power play, which needed great improvement. As we've been talking about for the last half an hour, we really haven't learned a lot about the goalies, other than the fact that Sam Ersson is maybe more injury prone than we would like. And that Alexei Kolosov needs more work. So far, it's all negative things we've learned. I don't know if we've learned which of the young wingers is going to be consistent enough to be part of a really good team moving forward. Like, Forster's had a really good last month and a half, and Tippett's been better, but he's still inconsistent. Like, Bobby Brink's been better, but do we know that any of those guys are like, that we're comfortable being like, this guy's a top 6 winger on a Stanley Cup team? Like, have we learned anything like that? Like, I'm really struggling to think of the positives that we've learned so far from this season. I don't know. I'm even with Noah Cates playing as well as he has the last month. It's great. Why didn't he play like that most of last year and the first few months this season? Like, I don't know. I just have more questions. I have way more questions than answers than I would like for a year that's, supposed to be moving towards, ending the rebuild.
We're expecting some kind of linear improvement, and it's just natural. And I'm not saying you're in that vein, Dan, but I think that's part of the problem, because we've seen Cates come on, and after disappearing last year, and we've seen Bobby Brink improve, but it's not really showing up. I mean, he has 19 points. And the only stat I could dig up, because I've watched him play, I think we all agree Bobby Brink is faster, he's stronger, he knows how to check this year. And yet I had to dig real hard to come up with a stat that reflected, and it was expected goals 5-on-5 was a little bit better than last year, but points is basically the same and all that. So it can be difficult to dig out, which guys on this team are, well, okay, this year is established. He's a keeper. Well, for all the good stories we have about Cates and Brink, there are some guys that have fallen back. You have Nick Seeler wasn't really playing that well until recently, and I think he's getting some chemistry now. with Drysdale, and maybe they're helping each other a little bit more and getting more used to playing each other. Sanheim's play has fallen off a little bit recently after really coming out like gangbusters and earning that Team Canada nomination for the Four Nations tournament. Farabee looked like a keeper a couple of years ago. Now it seems like he doesn't have much of a future here, and they keep force feeding him into the lineup. And of course, Cam York has not really been playing that well overall when it looked like everybody wanted to sign him for a long-term contract. So just kind of echoing what Dan's saying, for as many positive stories as we have, and Konechny, of course, he's having a great year. And it is a tough thing this year. And this is why I'm saying I think the patience is running out with the punditry and among the fans for, them going into a year and having another sideways year where some guys regress, some guys progress. But where are we at? That's the big problem. Kevin, any thoughts in with regard to like how is this received by the front office? I know they put on a certain kind of facade, like, well, you'll hear about it if we make a trade, you're not going to hear anything, or are they as cool and calculated as they seem? Do you think, or do you think they're a little bit concerned the attendance maybe is not as good as they would have thought with Michkov here, and maybe things aren't as rosy? It's tough this far in with no end in sight for them to become anything special as a team.
Yeah, I don't specifically from the attendance thing. I don't see anything necessarily wrong with that. But then again, like they really didn't play at home much in December, and November was a good month for them. So I think that like those handful of games, you actually got some really good home ice performances, and crowd was engaged and things like that. So now that they're going to finally play a home game on Tuesday night for, I think the broadcast said for the first time in 17, 18 days or something like that. Like I'll be curious to see how that kind of looks over the course of the next several weeks and see if that goes further. I think with the front office, we kind of tend to, and rightfully so, we do tend to lump both, everybody together to a degree. We lump Keith Jones and Danny Briere together. I think more of the roster construction falls on Danny Briere, and more of the kind of like Keith Jones to me is more of a bridge between I can assist Danny Briere on anything that may need assisting with, but I'm also kind of a marketer, and I'm trying to give the best perception of the team that I can for whatever. I think you tend to notice that Keith Jones is the guy who will pop into the booth and do a quick interview with somebody, or do the interview on the pregame show. And maybe that's just the broadcasting background that comes into play, I'm sure. But I don't think Danny Briere necessarily feels the need, not that he'll never go on to a broadcast, but I don't think he feels the need to talk about the day-to-day operations of roster construction and where they are with that or whatever. And I think that's where that kind of we'll know before you do kind of mindset comes from.
Right.
To me, with the roster construction, or looking for some of the, between the positives and the negatives of this whole thing and kind of where it is, the patience running out, I don't think has anything to do with the timeline of the rebuild as much as it does the timeline of success in general. I think it's more of a tired of the last decade, tired of the last 50 years, however you want to pick, whatever way you want to pick to spin it. It's to me, it's collective. I think that's what all of that comes from. They haven't won, how long it's been since they've won a Stanley Cup, how long it's been since they've been in the playoffs. I think that all just starts to lump together, and that's where that frustration comes from. I think in terms of trying to figure out kind of what you learn or whatever it is, and this is where my previous statement kind of comes from, where I sit and go, half the teams in the league suck, because it's like that's what I've learned most about the league this year. To me, is there's a lot of teams with a lot of problems and not a lot of answers, and some of that may be salary cap related, but some of it is also self-inflicted. It's bad decisions, and bad decisions to me, or poor decisions, or not the right decision, or however you want to categorize it, can be front office related. It can be fundamental on the ice related. Like there are times where I watch this team play and I just look at the number of fundamental mistakes that are made, and I sit there and I go, to me, that's not coaching. That's not even a coaching thing, because you could say that 20 times. You still got to go out there and do it. And you should know the fundamental thing to do. It should be something that's not, this isn't John Tortorella isn't drilling it into your head. This is something that should have been drilled into your head since Pee Wee. Like that doesn't equate to me that that's just a coaching issue. That's just a fundamental issue. And there's nothing more frustrating when I watch a game than watching a lack of fundamental play. Like the perfect example is that I didn't need to see John Tortorella react to the first Toronto goal on Sunday to look at what Ryan Poehling did and go, that's just dumb. I don't know what you're thinking. It's not fundamental. It's not the smart decision. And you know better than that. You should know better than that. You're an NHL player. And that was one of the things I kind of like. Poehling's a good example to kind of go into with this, because one of the things I was worried about going into this year, one of the things I believe was strongly possible, was you had a bunch of guys I thought played over their heads last year and that gave you more than you could have ever imagined, Poehling being one of them. And I didn't think the numbers or anything like that were going to come close to what they gave you in a year that you almost made the playoffs with that kind of stuff. Now you're looking at what kind of their reality is, and it's what your reality is. Like, you've got a bunch of players that don't necessarily move the needle. And to me, the big move that they need to make if they're going to do something like that, it doesn't have to be even something that necessarily is immediate. If they ended up with one of these high picks and got a guy who projects to be the type of centerman that the centerman to Matvei Michkov's winger position, I think people would be thrilled about it. I think that was kind of one of the things that was bubbling the whole time, even last season, was, well, there's this guy, and when he comes over, it's going to make certain aspects of the game better. And it has, like we said with the power play, it's made aspects of the game better because Michkov is Michkov, and you see his creativity. And even if it's not equating to points at the moment, if he's hit a bit of a rookie wall, I get that. I think what people get frustrated with, or that they kind of lean into, and look, I'm not trying to make this a coaching conversation, but you hear what John Tortorella says about, I think so-and-so can be this, or I think this guy can be that, or whatever. And it doesn't always necessarily equate to what the standard of today's game is, or at least what the makeup of today's game is, where he'll say he's not trying to make a guy a checker, but that's also an emphasis. Like, you've got to still be a physical element things. So you're taking away the speed aspect of the game, or the size aspect of the game, or all these combinations of things that could work. It's great to see Bobby Brink kind of grow into his game. It's great to see Tyson Forster get back to what I thought made him successful as a rookie. I think that one of the big things with Noah Cates over the last month and a half that's worked is, I think you spent way too much time last season worrying about whether or not you thought he was a winger or a center. You've given him the center position back, and I think it's a fit for him. That's what's also making that work. He's got two wingers who actually complement him very well. So it all kind of comes into play. As much as you can't necessarily try to force feed that as a coach, I think there's elements where you try to sometimes, because you're looking for combinations. And I think I think that it would be crazy to say otherwise, that you're not looking for that. I think everybody's looking for that all the time. And even when you should try to let those things form organically and create these combinations that work best for your team and maybe give you a better shot to win because something's working, I think you can try to get too cute with it and overthink it and get too involved with it. I think that's what's happened with Michkov lately, that you're trying to find the right combinations for him and it's not working out. And you're going to try, because that your success over November was largely predicated by the way Michkov was playing, especially those 5 games he had where he was 2 points per game. And I think you've been trying to find that since that happened. And when you're trying to find it, I think it actually can lead to potentially more problems. And then you start to kind of, almost within the game, you almost start to kind of second guess yourself. And then that changes the ice times around. You mix lines up. So this guy's not going to play this period, that kind of thing. It kind of creates this way too hands-on overthinking approach sometimes. And I think that's what gets people frustrated when they see ice times for guys that they think should have more involvement, that should be playing more often, that aren't.
Yeah, I can see that. It's stressful being a Flyers fan. It's you're trying to get blood from a stone, and yet they don't really have a lot of choices because of the cap and all that. So it's kind of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Chef, you look like you want to chime in.
Yeah, I was wondering, if you look at the current roster and the contracts and all that, it's the reason why I said off season, and I know we were talking about roster construction with Danny. I think he's a little bit handcuffed here because he really doesn't have any expiring contracts for rentals this year. I guess the two, palatable trade chips he might have is what Farabee could be on a better team, and I guess also at defense with Ristolainen too. but they're both carrying 2-year deals to at least 2 more years on them. So I was just wondering, is you realistically, Kev, in a trade scenario in season, how do you overcome this if you're Danny Briere, and how do you get somebody to take these two? Well, let's face it, Risto's pretty much had a decent, very above average, good season, and Farabee's like kind of floundering right now. He might be one of those change of scenery guys that might just need it. But what do you do here? What if you're armchair GM? How do you handle this?
I mean, part of that probably comes back to whatever the asking price is. Like, sometimes I think you got to be realistic, and I know that you want to value players, and you have a value of them from whatever it may be, whether it was that you were involved in giving out a previous contract in some way. There wasn't much overlap with Danny Briere and Chuck Fletcher. It was less than a year, but it was still there nonetheless. And I don't think any of those contracts factor in, but nonetheless, Briere was always hovering around the organization at that time anyway, before he had an official title. So I'm sure that he was probably involved in conversations to some degree, at least for an opinion. So I'm sure that for all the years that we've heard Scott Lawton's name come up, for example, I'm sure, Danny Briere knows what Scott Lawton is and knows what he means to a room and knows, what other teams would think of him from a value standpoint. So that becomes a situation where you just need to be kind of more willing to take the opportunity that somebody may present to you and assume that it's the best thing you're going to get. You can't just sit around forever with the same roster and expect things to change. You do have to influence some of the change to a degree. And as much as you may not want to do, that's where I kind of come back to, okay, if you really want to hold on to Joel Farabee because he's 24 and you're worried about what the potential could be down the line, I get it. But I can't sit here and I don't know what value a Scott Lawton brings for 3 more years. I don't know what value a Ristolainen brings for 3 more years. I think it's great that they're playing, decently right now. That helps in some capacity. It helps their value for that matter. But I don't understand what you'd be holding on to 2 guys in their 30s for too much longer at this point. It doesn't make much sense if you're supposed to be the rebuilding team. I can understand not wanting to trade a 24-year-old or having to think a little bit about even a Morgan Frost, and I think Frost is in the same position as Farabee is. But I look at that and I go, okay, you got a guy in his mid-20s. I understand how you can think there's an element that the timeline matches up in some way. There is no element for where the timeline matches up for guys in their 30s already, though. There just isn't. Yeah. Those are guys you should be looking to move from the cap space perspective, from the roster spot perspective. I mean, there really is just no explanation for keeping certain guys around for too much longer if they have good value. If they don't have good value, then I understand it. At this point in time, they're going to ride out a contract like Nick Delorier's because there's nothing to do with it. No one's going to do anything with that at least right now. He's been hurt. He hasn't played much. That is what it is. But if you're going to get something for Scott Lawton or for Rasmus Ristolainen and it's as good as you think you're going to get, you can't be afraid to pull the trigger either. Other teams are making moves left and right and willing to do it. And then you got to also evaluate within that also. It's not just the current roster players, but you've got to evaluate if there is a price or somebody that is worth a prospect or worth one of these picks you've got. You do have to also consider that if you're going to make a move. That's where I think that draft time, that week between, leading up to the draft, that's where I think that could be valuable, because if there is someone on the market, someone who is readily available in some way, I think you need to entertain certain things and not necessarily be so committed to, especially if you are trying to speed up the rebuild process. You don't want to be overly committed to draft picks that are going to be another 2-3 years down the line if something really good is there. And I'm definitely willing to understand I would be hesitant to go 2 of the 3 firsts you've got for something necessarily, because I do think there's still value to having multiple first round picks in a draft. But you do have 3 of them, and if there's something you can get that you include one of those firsts in, you have to explore it. You have to be willing to potentially take a chance on what the price is for something, especially if it's going to really help advance your franchise one way or the other, whether it's a top defenseman, a top centerman potentially, or even, and it doesn't have to be somebody who's already established as one. For weeks I've been hearing the thing about Dylan Cousins and the possibility he gets moved, and that's a centerman who would help your team. I don't know that he's going to be top. He's going to be 1C material, but you don't have anybody who comes close. So you might as well at least explore the possibility.
Yeah, and of course, there's all this talk about JT Miller, who's not really a guy the Flyers would be looking at, but Elias Pettersson, on the other hand, uh, I'm not sure. There's the talk is real. It's not just spitballing when you have Friedman and all the pundits talking about that. I mean, that's a player the Flyers, you would think, would want to make a play for. The problem is with where the Canucks are at and the kind of talent and where their roster and their timeline is, it doesn't seem to match up with what the Flyers have to offer. They just don't seem to be a good fit at all. And that's kind of frustrating with all the assets the Flyers do have.
And well, see that, and that's where I kind of go into the, if you're looking at a Pettersson, would I trade one of the 3 first-round picks and Oliver Bonk for him? Possibly. Yeah. I would consider it. That's where I can't get too caught up in whatever you think Oliver Bonk's going to become and your own evaluation of that. Their evaluation may be different than each one of us individually, but that's where I can't get too caught up in 5 years down the line of what you think Oliver Bonk's going to be versus what you may have in front of you. Especially, it's funny that that's the guy whose name is coming up right now too, because it's almost like, to go back to those top 5 picks, that the rarity that they've had a top 5 pick, there's almost a second chance at one, and possibly that change of scenery type thing again, that maybe Pettersson just wants out too for the same kind of thing. It would be interesting if that was something that was on the table, but you're exactly right in terms of kind of what do they offer that even levels up to what Vancouver could get for a player like that. Do they even have anything close? And that's where I start to dip into, you're not just going to be able to trade Joel Farabee for Elias Pettersson and say that's what's going to work. You're going to need to throw in the first and Oliver Bonk type prospects to kind of get that moving in some way. That's what's going to move the needle in that conversation even a little bit, is to start in those areas and then maybe talk about how you can make the money work and give them something of value in return as well.
Yeah, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Elias Pettersson is a guy that would be, I wouldn't use the word perfect because there's clearly some kind of issues there, and who knows how he would mesh with a Tortorella. But anyway, his talent is not something that you find available very often. But the big question with him, and Kevin sort of alluded to it, is he makes $11.6 million a year. The Flyers have 0 cap space. How in the world do you make that work? So, and also, Kevin mentioned he would move a first and Bonk, which for me would, obviously be a no-brainer for a guy like Pettersson. But again, a couple things: the money, that obviously neither the Bonk nor the first have any money towards the Flyers cap right now, and secondly, how does that help Vancouver right now? I mean, Vancouver's sort of in a cup window for the next 2 to 3 seasons. So I don't know how a late first round pick and Oliver Bonk sort of help there. I'm thinking Vancouver would want guys like a guy like Farabee, I'm assuming would be part of a deal like that. And, maybe Ristolainen would be a guy that they might want, kind of like a tough defenseman who might be good in the playoffs. So I'd be thinking it would look something like, maybe Farabee, Morgan Frost, Ristolainen, and a first plus a prospect or something like that. Is because then you're talking about, okay, you're getting rid of Ristolainen's salary, you're getting rid of Farabee's salary, you're getting rid of Morgan Frost's salary. Now you're getting a little bit closer to it, and then you've got to add some stuff in. But Pettersson is clearly a guy that they should be looking at, even if it's not perfect because of some of the, I don't even know if you'd call them character concerns, whatever it is that's coming out of this JT Miller Pettersson feud.
Yeah. Those opportunities don't present themselves very often. And the Flyers, you would hope, would want to pick up the phone and find out what's going on. I have no reason to believe they'd have it. And we just don't know. That's a frustrating thing. And the other player that's a little bit concerning lately, his ice time's been going down again like it did last year, although it went up for last night's game, was Sean Couturier. And I'm very concerned about his trajectory, something we've mentioned in the past. He's not, he looks like a declining player out there. He's doing his job. He's trying as hard as he can. It's not an effort thing. He's not been an effective player. It's 18 points, 7 goals, 11 assists. in 37 games. So it's not horrible, but certainly not the $7 million. Was it 7?
I mean, he only has 6 more years left on his contract, Isaiah. I mean,
yeah, no,
I don't know what you're worried about, man.
Boy, that is kind of a depressing thought. If he's getting outplayed by a guy like Noah Cates right now, I feel more confident with Cates out there.
Geez, does that mean that Cates is our top line center now? Is that what you're saying? Is that how bad we are right now?
Well, how is he not? In terms of
certainly is the best center on the team right now.
Yeah, I mean that whole line, they have the highest expected goals percentage on the team by far. In fact, it's 8th overall. And if you take out lines that really haven't had less than 100 minutes, they're like number 4 in the entire league right now with a reasonable sample size. At 68.5% going into last night's game. That's pretty impressive.
Well, part of this is also why I think Jet Lachenko is penciled into the lineup for opening night next year also. Like, they don't have anybody else that goes in there. Like, let's remove all the external factors here for a minute and say that they were able to just get Pettersson regardless of circumstances. It would obviously be a package along the level of what Dan said. It would have to be something like that to make the money work and all that. But if you had somebody like that who does become your number 1 center at that point, and then like I can see how they would. I don't know if it would work right away, but I can see how Lachenko's ceiling could be at second line center. Cates is a third line center for sure, and Couturier is the 4th right now, and that would make a lot of sense if you line them up that way. For at least to start with, I think Lachenko could hold his own decently. He would hit a wall at some times, and maybe that's when you give Cates a little more ice time, and you kind of play with that middle 6. And there's other options also, obviously, like there's all sorts of things. But that to me, if they were able to get somebody who is that clear cut, like Pettersson is, of being immediate top line material on this roster, that to me is how you would probably fill out the rest of it at that point. Assume at least to start next year. That would be my guess, because at that point I'm right there with everything that's been said. Like, I assume that if you had Pettersson, Frost is a thing of the past, that he's gone. And to be honest, I don't even know where Poehling comes into that. Maybe he plays one of the wings or something like that at that point, because it just doesn't add up.
Right. That's where you move on from a guy like Lawton, and maybe he's part of that deal. Mm-hmm. Going back, and maybe Lachenko might have to go back to make that deal work in their minds. I don't know. I
feel like that might be, from a prospect standpoint, I feel like that might be kind of where you start to lose interest at that point with Lachenko specifically. But that's why I only go back one more year and I say Bonk would be on the table for me for a player like that, especially for how high they value him and how for how much of a non-starter he's been in just about anything. Because I've seen trade proposals that come up where you see Bonk's name in there and you kind of immediately throw it out the window when you hear about it, and it's not like I'm not talking about like they're real trade proposals that are out there, but if people are speculating, this guy's available, Bonk in the deal or whatever, I've heard enough from this front office to know how much they like Bonk that it probably is a non-starter. But I think there's a level where you've got to take that off the table to a degree.
Interesting. I personally, I'm kind of with Dan on this one. I don't know if I quite see it with that player. I think he's a nice player. I don't know if there's a lot more there, especially offensively. But so any other thoughts as the Flyers head into the second half of the season, things you're looking forward to or projections you want to make? Dan, you go ahead.
I'm looking forward to being at the most anticipated Flyers game of the year, Saturday night, as Cutter Gauthier rolls into town. I mean, as a season ticket holder, I can say that when I put my tickets up for sale, that was the game that most people were asking me about. I had like 5 people on the waiting list for the Ducks game. So this is going to be a very anticipated game. I'm hopefully Gauthier shows up and he's going to get booed. Who knows what else will happen? Maybe they'll throw some batteries at him.
JD Drew of hockey.
I was at the JD Drew game, and that's what I'm looking forward to. Is I'll be at that game with my parents. I'm going to come up to Philly on Saturday. We'll go to the game, and it should be I think it'll be a good one, as sort of as non-impactful a game as the Flyers Anaheim game was in Anaheim. I think this one will be a little bit more exciting and have a little bit more kind of oomph to it. So that's what I'm looking forward to in the short term.
Okay, that one will not have any short of less attendance for that one for sure. That's been anticipated for a long time. I think if Cutter said that he had the first meeting circled on his calendar, then everybody in Flyers land has had this circled since the schedule came out. When this game was going to be, when Anaheim came to town. So I can't wait to see how this plays out.
This is the old adage where you always heard of Irish amnesia. You forget everything but the grudge. This is Philly amnesia here. This is definitely going to be, this guy's going to live forever in infamy. He's going to get booed every time he comes here, every time he touches the puck, even when he's on like another team 10 years from now at the twilight of his career. He's still going to get booed, and the fans will still savor it.
That could be the case. We'll see if I guess he's not circling that one on his calendar, but the Flyer fans are. So, Kevin, yeah, I'm going to hit you that question again, though, with the projections going forward. It is a frustrating season. I think it's pretty obvious. We're not hiding it very well. It's like they're in a box, and it's like, how the hell do you get out of this box? Is it wait till next year? And what if next year doesn't come? It's like that old song by by Creedence Clearwater Revival. So yeah, someday never comes. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that especially the way so far that this month has started off, because I looked at December. Going into December, I thought they actually, like I said, I thought they had a really good chance to kind of make some waves there with some wins. Honestly, they were playing some teams I thought were more on the downswing in a lot of ways, and I think they started the month off like that a little bit. If something would have been different about the way the Florida game ends, where they don't lose 7-5, they end up winning that game 5-4 like they led in the third period. They finish the game in Boston or something like that. Maybe it changes the course of things. But that really kind of was the snowball starting on the amount of goals allowed in the month in all of these games. How many times did we go through and 4, 5, 6, 7 goals? It was kind of, it really turned into a bad situation. And now they're going to play teams that have the offensive firepower, that rank in the top 10. Like, they've got a lot of those teams, Toronto again, Dallas, Florida. They play New Jersey 3 times. That's not going to be easy. They also get to play a chunk of games against teams that have as many problems as they do. It feels like they play the Islanders 3 times this month. They play the Rangers again. Detroit has slightly turned it around since the coaching change, but not by much. And you still got Columbus on there as well. Like, it's kind of a mixed bag month, and I'm kind of curious to see if they falter against the teams that we think they could win games against, kind of like last month. Because I do think that in the early going of the month, when you have a week ahead of you at home, even though you are the home team for all this, playing Toronto, Dallas, and Florida specifically, like I'll give them the Anaheim game. I think they probably should win that game, but the other 3, I don't know how to expect anything other than the same thing that we've seen so far. And maybe that changes. Yeah, I'm curious to see if at some point over the course of the month, if it changes our perspective on the standings a little bit, because like I said, right now, to me, I look one way and I look the other way, and they're the same margin from being in the playoffs or being a bottom 5 team. It's that weird dynamic where so many teams are in the same position right now that maybe over the course of even just a short period of time, like I had been saying for a while, over the course of when they were either in one of the playoff spots or on the cusp of a spot, that all looks great to say until you realize a 3-game losing streak could knock you right to the bottom of the division.
Yep.
And that's very much on the table right now. I mean, they've already lost the first 2 games, one in overtime against Toronto, and you got Toronto and Dallas to start this homestand. Could very easily be looking at 4 losses in a row to start 2025. And what does that do to their positioning with other teams playing? So my expectation kind of holds the way it is. I said at the beginning of the year, I thought they would be a little bit worse than they were last year. They finished with technically what would have been the 12th spot in terms of the draft lottery going in. I saw them maybe finishing around 10th this year. I kind of still see it, and that's about where they are right now. And I kind of see the ebbs and flows of the rest of this season kind of being similar, that they'll get good goaltending sometimes. They'll get bad goaltending most of the time. They'll get bad defensive coverages most of the time. It's still a process, and that's where I see it right now.
Gotcha. Kev, where can people catch up to you on social media, and what are some of the things that you have coming up real soon?
Sure. It's pretty easy. Kevin @Kevin_Durso on pretty much everywhere. The only one that's different is on Blue Sky. It's just Kevin Durso. They don't do underscores. Blue Sky does not do underscores. So I wasn't able to stay consistent with that. I like consistency, but not there. And you can find all my stuff on 97.3 ESPN.com, sportstalkphilly.com, YWT podcast, Flyers Files podcast for 97.3. We were on a little bit of a break with that. We're going to bring that back later on, probably this week or somewhere in that time frame. On Instagram, all the pre and post game videos, you name it, trying to stay busy. They and you guys know it, this team keeps us busy for sure. So staying busy with them.
You got it. Kevin, thanks so much for coming on. Look forward to having you on again very soon.
Absolutely, guys. My pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks, Kev.
You got it. See you later.
Bye-bye. So I'm really frustrated with things. I mean, it's pretty obvious all night. Flyers went 2-3-1 since we last recorded. I'm counting the Pittsburgh game we were recording, and we were talking about the WJC when we had our buddy Steve Cornianos talking about that tournament. Dan, did you get to catch any of those games, and did you watch any Flyers in particular?
I did. It's funny. I made the decision this year to get rid of cable TV. One of the main reasons that I didn't want to get rid of it was because it's hard to find NHL Network. So what I ended up doing was we got YouTube TV, which doesn't have NHL Network, but I got a 1-month trial of Fubo TV, which does have NHL Network, and I got it for like $1.50. It was like crazy, but for just the 1 month. So anyway, I watched World Juniors, and it was tough, like you mentioned, Isaiah, with Team Canada, because they made a lot of bad decisions. They didn't have Carter Yakimchuk or Zane Perek on the team. Yeah. They were kind of like the forwards who were really skilled guys like Gavin McKenna and Porter Martone, Carson Riekoff. They didn't play those guys enough. It was weird. They had Oliver Bonk as the power play quarterback for the first game, which was a disaster because he's not all that great offensively. He's not all that skilled. Then they moved him to the bumper. They lost in the quarterfinals again. So Bonk, I think, led them in ice time. He wasn't particularly impressive. Like, he never does anything that particularly impresses me. Like, I think his upside is middle pair NHL defenseman. And Jet Lutsenko probably deserved more ice time. He scored a really nice breakaway goal, made a really nice move early in the tournament. Didn't do a whole lot after that, but he didn't get many opportunities. So it's really hard to find any takeaways from the Canadian kids. It was more as a Flyers fan about watching some of these kids that they could have had, like Gabe Perreault, who was fantastic as always, who they selected Oliver Bonk over, which may or may not prove to be a good selection, but Gabe Perreault looks like a very talented player. We have enough wingers, though, I guess. Zev Buyam was one of the better players in the tournament. I actually thought that Cole Hudson for the Washington Capitals, his older brother Lane Hudson, one of the best young players in the league for Montreal. Cole Hudson slipped a lot in the draft. The Caps got him, I think, late in the first round, maybe. And he was fantastic. I mean, he might have been the best defenseman in the tournament. Really good. Him and Buyam were fantastic, and two guys that the Flyers, passed on various times. So for me, it was more about that. It's always such a great tournament watching. It was even though Team Canada had two Flyers on them, I was kind of rooting against them because they're just so arrogant with the way that they're managed and their coaches. They didn't practice during the tournament, which they got a lot of flack for. It's just kind of insane. So seeing them lose was great. And the fact that I think Lutsenko probably deserves some more ice time. But it was a great tournament, championship went into overtime. Great pass from Zeb Bouillon to Teddy Stiga in overtime. Stiga's a guy that the Flyers also potentially could have drafted with one of their picks.
32nd. He was right there, right?
Yep, he was right there.
That pick. Yep.
But yeah, I thought it was a great tournament. Not too many takeaways you can take away from the Flyers, guys.
So the Finns, I mean, wow, they really hung in there. They played a great game, and we have to send draft analysis him. Steve was great. He kind of predicted that the Finns had a really good team and they would be in there. And what how do you pronounce the guy's Flyers?
Ruohonen.
Ruohonen. Okay, so it is. I was saying it right. All right. I didn't see much of him, but he ended up with 4 assists in the whole thing. So, I mean, I hear his name called a lot, but I mean, and I think he could still play for one more season, I think, with that next year.
I think he's going to Harvard. I heard him interviewed. I think he's more of a long-term prospect. He's coming along fine. He looks like
he was solid. I was just reading Scott Wheeler's, who's been on our show, did a really good article about his thoughts on all the players at the World Juniors, and he said that Ruohonen played with a good drive and had a lot of jump. So,
Yeah. I don't know if he mentioned if he was going. I think he's the guy that's going to Harvard. So he's more of a long-term project, at least in that way. And of course, Berglund, he hurts his hand or something like that for Sweden, so he didn't play. So he was the other guy. Him and Bjarnason never really got a chance. So, yeah, it was a little bit tough watching Boyum do so well out there and being a catalyst in a way that I haven't seen a Flyers defenseman be since Ghost is here. But he's supposed to be a better player than Ghost. It remains to be seen. Yeah. And like Ghost, he was on a NCAA champion.
I mean, we talk about how we still haven't identified who the top power play quarterback is. I still think that Emil Andre looked really good in that role. But when you watch guys like Zeev Bouillon, Cole Hudson, last year Lane Hudson, you immediately can see, hey, this guy can run an NHL power play, right? And you don't get that with any of the guys that the Flyers have on their roster right now.
Yeah.
Sadly but true.
I think the frustration I have is I saw the Colorado Avalanche. I know, different situation, different timeline and all that. Their goaltending sucked. They made up their mind and they replaced both guys because they had to. They're in their timeline and they're in their window where guys like Rantanen, I think he's got to get paid for next year, and McKinnon, Makar. So, and they're hoping Landeskog might be able to come back. So they're trying to win a cup, but it's frustrating that I keep looking at their lines like you were saying earlier. It's like if they just had one center, just give me a guy who is a real second line center. 20 goals, 35 assists or 40 assists, something that would be second line kind of production. And it would be such a more fun team to watch.
Yeah.
It's like a sinkhole at that position. And I don't think that Lachenko looks like anything. We'll see. We have to see. He's going to be 19. There's going to be a lot of pressure on him next year unless they make a big trade and bring a guy who's really good in to kind of take some of that pressure off of him. But, yeah. So, countdown to the trade deadline. I think this goaltending thing is a bigger deal than some people think. I mean, if we're supposed to watch these games and we're going to wrap this up. It's because there's no real solution other than wait for Danny. And I'm hanging on, but I have to confess, I'm losing my faith a little bit. It's kind of whittling away until Briere really shows he can improve this team. It's starting to feel a lot like Ron Hextall. It does. And I don't want to fall into that because that's very easy to just say, but that's, Dan, do you feel that way? Does it feel that way to you? Like,
I mean, it's a very different vibe than it was with Ron Hextall. But the thing for me is that, again, I talked about earlier tonight, like, I don't know if you recover from the whiffs on Nolan Patrick and Cutter Gauthier and there's, people want answers. I'm just not sure there's an answer. Like, again, you don't just, 1Cs don't grow on trees. Like, it would be great if they had a chance to draft James Higgins this year, right? Or Michael Misa, or Anton Frondell, guys that could potentially develop into 1Cs, but we're probably not going to have a chance to draft those guys. We had 2 top 5 picks and we blew both of them. So I don't know. There's no easy answers, but the vibe is very different from Ron Hextall and Dave Haxtell. I mean, those guys were just so stubborn. I mean, both of those guys, so stubborn. It's a much different vibe with Jonesy and Briere. A lot more
about the results.
But the results, but that's what I'm saying is, like, I don't know that anybody right now could figure out a path to get this team a 1C. Like, well, I don't know. What is the path? I don't know.
I just want another young player. Give me 3 2Cs, whatever it takes to just move this thing along. That's why I was so critical over the offseason. But I'm just gonna leave it there. Chef, why don't you give us your closing thoughts for tonight?
My closing thoughts are going to be this. It's going to be a reverse of last year's. Instead of like being in the playoff hunt and then slowly fading out, they're going to give us that little bit of false hope where they're going to make a run and then just fall up short. I think that the only way they're going to fix this team is going to be right after the season. I think you'll see a big move. I think you'll see a couple big moves before the draft by Danny, but I don't think we're going to see it anytime. I think this season they're writing off the season already. I think so. So, hey, if you want to argue with me about that, you can find me at Chef the Left B on X. Chef the Left B on X.
You got it, Dan. Any final words for tonight?
Not really. I mean, we've been over it. I'm excited to see Cutter Gauthier and welcome him with a warm response on Saturday. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I mean, we've just got to figure out what the fun times are. Chef talked about how he thinks his team's going to do well down the stretch. I with this goaltending, I don't know how that's going to happen, but maybe we'll get some surprises. But we'll see. Hopefully Mitch Cobb can get a little bit of a second half jump in his step, because some of the most exciting moments this year were certainly from him, whether it was that first 2-goal game he had early on against Edmonton, or some of his overtime plays, some of the great goals that he scored. It'd be nice if he can kind of rebound. He's getting lesser ice time from Torts now. Maybe that'll energize him for the second half. And he can go off and learn English in the off season so that he can actually communicate with his coach and the players. So in many ways, that'll be, a very important step for him. But, we'll just try and have some moments to enjoy the rest of the season.
Absolutely. People catch you on X at dsilver88.
Yeah, I'm on Blue Sky 2 now, dsilver88. So either one of those.
You got it. You can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck at O&B Puck. On X, we're also on Blue Sky. We're also on Getter, getting saucy sometimes, at O&B Puckcast at O&B Puckcast. On that particular platform, the Flyers have 5 games between now and the next time we meet you. They are home for the next 4. Toronto on Tuesday. Thursday, they play Dallas. Then the big game against Cutter Gauthier, the game of the year, Saturday night, the 11th. Then on Monday, the 13th, they play the Stanley Cup champion, Florida Panthers. Then they're in Columbus, the Blue Jackets, and see what happens there. And then hopefully we'll come back and talk to you on the 15th. And you can follow the O&B Puckcast on several podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Amazon, Audible, Deezer. We also have a YouTube page, just plug in there, O&B Puckcast, a Facebook page, same thing. And when you subscribe or follow on these platforms, it helps move us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcasts. And of course, that's what we are. So we do appreciate you listening. And until next time, everybody, take care.